This is the Darcy Giroux Podcast, episode 50. Today, my guest is Tim Moen. We're going to be talking about Justin Trudeau's resignation, his potential replacements, and Donald Trump turning Canada into the 51st state. Tim Moen, welcome back to the Darcy Giroux Podcast. How are things?
That's fantastic. I love being here on the podcast. Love the ambiance of the company. You know, so we're going to have some really insightful things to say. So great to be here.
Not like that last time we talked.
Oh my God, that was just a shit show.
Actually, It was funny. I was noticing. I think I've had you on more than anybody else, and it seems to be every 10 episodes or something. We need to get back to the basics and have Tim Moen on to talk some real liberty.
My God, everyone tries to get fancy with liberty and fucking boutique liberty. This and we need the government to do this little nuanced thing to get more liberty over here. No, people, we just need to keep it simple. Hate the state. That's it. Hate the state. We don't need it. We don't need it to do anything to get liberty. It's the state is the root of all our problems. Well, the root of all our problems runs across the heart of man. Okay, sorry, Solzhenitsyn, but the state emerges from that dark side of that.
Okay,
so we just have to recreate man, and we'll have no state. There we go.
Yeah. Well, AI is on its way.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for that horrifying reminder. So there's a few things I want to get into. We're going to get into Justin Trudeau's resignation, his potential replacements. I want to talk a bit about Poilievre. Then, of course, we can't forget about Donald Trump and Canada becoming the 51st state. And we'll try and look at that from contrast it with some secession type conversations across North America, Alberta in particular, I think. And then we'll talk a little bit about the differences between nationalism and patriotism. So, but before we get into any of that, let's so it's going to be a politically heavy episode. First of all, getting interested in politics and then joining a fringe, becoming the leader of basically a fringe political party. I mean, they're my people. Don't get me wrong, the Libertarian Party, but
I don't take offense to it. Believe me. I became a libertarian in mid 2000s, maybe, and 6 months later, I was an anarchist, as is the case. When you apply Ayn Rand's principles consistently, it turns out it leads to anarchism, not what she concluded. But I was convinced mainly to stay out of politics. I mean, the people I looked up to back then was a younger Stefan Molyneux, who was just raging against the state at that time and was, very opposed to political action, as were many anarchists. But it was when, there's that old kind of cliche saying that you can leave politics alone, but politics won't leave you alone. And the thing that I guess got me involved in politics to some degree was when the Alberta government took over my industry, namely emergency medical services. So they decided to take over the ambulance, strip our community of control over EMS. And I could see exactly where this was going to go. And this was back in, I think, 2009. So, I was a vocal opponent of it. I was putting out YouTube critiques of it from a theoretical perspective, from a practical perspective, from an insider's perspective, explaining exactly how this was going to go, exactly why it was wrong, why it was evil. And I was doing some pretty eye-catching videos. At one point, I unveiled the new AHS uniform that I was wearing, which was hammer and sickle shirt. And, the medical director for Alberta, the top doc, reached out to my employer to ask me politely to take it down, which I didn't. I said, listen, I'm willing to listen to this guy. Give him my phone number, tell him to give me a call and explain to me. And if he convinces me that I'm on the wrong track here, I'll take it down. I'm open to reason and evidence. And of course, he never called me. So, I was kind of having a field day with it. I gained some notoriety among my colleagues in the province. Paramedics kind of province wide were kind of sending me notes, cheering me on, saying, yeah, you go fight this guy, And so we organized town halls and we did a bunch of fighting. And I noticed we weren't able to push back on the provincial takeover, but we were able to get a small win, which was retaining our control over our own dispatch center. They wanted to send dispatch from Fort McMurray all the way over to Peace River or some crazy thing. And I'm like, well, we've got these dispatchers here. We're not going to lay any of them off. So it's not going to save any money for the taxpayers to just lighten their load and take EMS off their plate and move that somewhere else, because we still need the same number of dispatchers for fire dispatch. So, this makes sense on no level. And we ended up winning. So at that point, I noticed, okay, political action seems to work in some sense. Like, at least we got something, at least fighting got us somewhere. And then I started being headhunted. I had some libertarians come to me and say, we noticed your libertarian content. We noticed you're getting some popularity. We'd like you to run for the party. I referred them to a blog I wrote 6 months earlier about how engaging in politics, engaging in voting, the voting process is I equated it to, basically inciting violence, and engaging in politics is inciting violence, and it's counterproductive. But they kept bringing up Ron Paul, and I was a big fan of Ron Paul. He was using his platform to get a message out. And after a while, I decided, you know what, you're right. It's silly not to stand on that stage and deliver a message. I mean, if I were a Christian and I was invited to a mosque to give a message, and I really cared about their souls and I believed in my message, why wouldn't I go into so-called enemy territory and try to deliver a message of salvation? So that's kind of how I looked at it. I had a very evangelical Christian upbringing. And so it kind of jibed with that narrative of go preach the gospel, the good news. And you don't do it just in church, although the fire needs to be preached to every now and then, but you also really need to get out to the gates of hell where people are suffering and lead them to the light. And so that's kind of how I viewed it as a mission. So I'm like, okay, in the next general election was in 2 years. I'll commit to running, and that'll give me 2 years to figure things out, how this all works. And then literally 2 days later, my member of parliament resigned, and I was thrust into a by-election, and I had no clue what I was doing. I was just the guy in Fort McMurray who had this big soapbox at the time. And now I was in the middle of a by-election, and all the attention was on this by-election because that's the only thing going on in Canadian politics. And I was just clumsily walking through it. And of course, that meme, I want gay married couples to protect their marijuana plants with guns, is something one of the many memes our campaign team kind of spit out there in the world. And that got me all this attention and popularity. And 2 months later was our convention. It was just serendipitous. All this stuff happened by chance. So I had no plan to be in politics. It just kind of was an opportunity that presented itself, and I couldn't say no. And next thing you know, I'm leading the party, and led the Libertarian Party to its most successful result in its 40 some year history. Here we are. And so now it's funny because I've actually come full circle, because now that I'm back working, I saw an opportunity in my profession to get back involved in politics again, because the Alberta government right now is restructuring healthcare, and we're not going to get the free market healthcare that we want, of course. But we can right now influence it in a positive direction, which is towards decentralization. Right now, everything is monopolized by Alberta Health Services. This one bureaucratic entity runs everything, all the healthcare, and they're a nightmare. And we want to break this up. We want to, and especially with EMS, we want communities to have local control over EMS again. So we're not just, because it's just been a nightmare under AHS. And so I ran for a position on my union executive that was specifically focused on political action. And so my goal now is to meet with MLAs and municipal councilors and try to shift the Overton window in a way that favors my membership, which just happens to be in a libertarian direction. It's a great opportunity to keep going on that work. And I'm right back full circle, back to fixing the thing that I warned about, all those years ago, 12, 13 years ago. All the predictions I made back then are coming true. And now your boy has the opportunity to say, I told you so back then, didn't listen to me. Now maybe you'll listen to me and we can fix things again and make EMS great again. Mega, I'm calling it. Sounds better than MAGA. Mega.
Yeah.
Mega.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. So there's one thing I'd like to touch on there, which is when you wrote that article claiming that, equating voting to violence, I personally still sympathize with that in a sense.
No, I think in a just world, Darcy, that inciting violence would be illegal, right? And it would be illegal in a stateless society to incite violence. Like you couldn't contract a killer to go impose or you couldn't contract an enforcer, tell an enforcer to go impose a minimum wage on a business, right? Here's a contract. You go make that business pay minimum wage. That if we were to do that now, right, as private citizens, we would be guilty of all sorts of crimes. But that's essentially what voting is. In a sense, contracting or, like inciting that person to go do some violence on my behalf. And so you're right. I mean, like, I think that would be illegal. And so, I mean, it's kind of nutty to say, or kind of, it sounds extreme, but most types of, political voting would likely be illegal in a just society.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Because it's inciting violence. So, but right now you can vote, but there's also another side to that, and I'm sympathetic to it, which is that most people, when they're voting, are trying to do it defensively. They see it as self-defense, right? Like if I vote for smaller government, whether it's for the Conservative Party, because I think they're going to shrink government, or the PPC, or certainly there's never any issue. You should never feel any moral compunction about voting for the Libertarian Party, which is only there to shrink the state and get rid of that violence. That is the exact opposite of inciting violence. But you can make a case that even these other parties, like even the Conservative Party, while they might increase the state in some areas, it might overall, you can make a case that they decrease it. And so you're trying to play defense and get the government off your back by casting a vote. But certainly I don't know how you're voting for the Liberals, or you're voting for the NDP, or you're voting for big government programs, how you're not guilty of inciting violence. I mean, it's a horrific offense, in my opinion.
Yeah. You took the words right out of my mouth. The defensive argument was exactly where I was going with that. So, okay, so that's great. So let's talk then about, inciting violence on the people of Canada. Justin Trudeau has resigned in the wake of all the violence he has incited. What was your initial reaction to Justin Trudeau's resignation?
I mean, in the weeks leading up to his resignation, and I hate to say this, but I actually kind of felt bad for him in a way. Like I know he's been bad for Canada. I know he's a vain little narcissist that's full of hubris. But part of me, for some reason, I look at Justin Trudeau as kind of a tragic character. He was born into this wealth and privilege, but he was always, like, he was molded, by his circumstances by his father, by all the people around him singing his praises. And, you know, like I just think of that young kid as a teen. I remember seeing a video of Trudeau as a teen, and you could tell he was just trying to say the right words. He was in some kind of debate club, and media were interviewing him, and he was trying really hard to play a part. And I always got the impression, just an impression I have, and I could be completely wrong, is just that Justin Trudeau has always been always wearing a mask his whole life and playing a part his whole life, and never been true to express his authentic self, and always trying to do what he thought would get him popularity and what would make people love him. And that very thing is what ended up taking him down in the end, and what made people hate him. And so that whole story arc, something about it makes me sad. I don't know what it is. At the same time, I'm happy to see him go, but
oh, for sure, he is 100% a political animal that was designed by the system, by this born into a political family, born into wealth and privilege. Basically,
he was groomed. I mean, they might as well have taken him. I mean, you could equate it. It's a little bit vulgar, but you could equate it to grooming a kid to be a sex worker, right? Into a sex working family. And you start by, taking their innocence away and chipping away at it and molding them into this thing. And then they become something reprehensible over time. And I can't help but feel bad for that person.
And then to watch the system that created him turn on him, that is to some extent he is the victim of the same system that he's perpetuated throughout his entire reign as prime minister, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's
I think what I'd like to hear your opinion on, his resignation. A little more, you touched on it a little bit there, a little more on his resignation, the impact it will have on, maybe the Liberal Party, but definitely on politics as a whole. Like what more does it represent when we're looking at it?
Well, I think it's like a sea change moment, right? And it's not just Trudeau, but we're seeing it, in the States with the Democrats. The age of woke is kind of over in terms of that being a political winner. At least woke leftism. I mean, I imagine maybe the reaction might be woke rightism or something. We could talk about that, but woke leftism seems to be over. And so I think his resignation is a change, is notice that Canadians are done with that BS. They're done with virtue signaling, done with all that. Okay. So, so now the left has some soul searching to do. What is it going to be? If it's not going to be constantly harping on oppressors versus oppressed, what is it going to be? Is it going to be something like radical centrism? Is it going to be, like fiscal responsibility and social liberty? How is it going to brand itself? And that will be interesting to see. I think so, and I suspect it'll be something like, we just want competent leadership, someone that knows what they're doing, that has a firm handle on things, that is smart, educated, and isn't going into the woke stuff and isn't going, but maintains kind of steady incremental progress, what a progressive would term as progress, right?
When you look at it like that, I think, the one guy that just did announce his leadership campaign for the Liberals was Mark Carney. He really does seem like one that could go, like he could have ended up in either party, as far as I'm concerned, to the Conservatives
Sure.
or the Liberals. And that really does seem to me like a shift towards the kind of centrism, the kind of, the historical Liberal Party of Canada. um, where that really embodied kind of that centrist view. And I don't know who else. I don't know who else. Give me your thoughts on Mark Carney. And I don't even know who else has announced a bid for leadership.
Yeah, I think Chrystia Freeland has said that she's announcing her bid for leadership on Sunday. And there's a couple other people I don't really know in the race. I suspect this is Mark Carney's race to lose. Like Chrystia Freeland, I think maybe she has a chance. I don't know, but I think she annoys a lot of Canadians. She always seems like she's methed out, weird facial expressions. She seems very patronizing. Like it's too much, right? And she's been there beside Trudeau so I think she might be associated too much with that regime. So I think this is probably Carney's to lose. And I mean, you saw him on, I saw a couple clips of him on the Daily Show. I saw some of my Liberal friends on my social media fawning over how great that went. I was like, ooh, this is not good, but maybe it was. And I got his book and I had a hard time even getting through the introduction. Just so much in there that I was making me frustrated and angry, right? Like his book is called Values or something like that. It's about value. We need to move towards value-based capitalism, which is exactly Klaus Schwab, and his what's his book, the new, the World Economic Forum. Trying to remember his book, but I read his book too, and it was more of the same, right? We need an international order that focuses on values like the climate, and we need to basically contort capitalism into something that the state has a heavy hand in and ensures that correct values are being expressed, that sort of thing. And in the introduction, he throws out as something that's obvious that when we were on a gold standard, it created all booms and busts. And I'm like, what? What if this guy? Of course, a central banker would say something like that, right? I mean, that's the exact opposite of what actually happens. But this is the kind of thinking. So, I mean, I just like getting through that introduction. So, but I'm gonna hammer through his book here and see. I just want to get a sense of how he thinks. But everything I've read so far confirms exactly my worst fears, which is he's a central banker. He's full of hubris. He believes that expert management and centralizing values in that management is what is going to get us through. And so it's the smart, scientific, rational, reasonable guys at the top that are compassionate about the world and all this stuff that need to run things with an iron fucking fist at the end of the day, of course. Of course he'd never say that, but and people I see, I mean, like the left is going to be enamored by that. And, initially I thought before I saw Carney's Daily Show appearance and I saw some of my Liberal friends fawning over him, I thought, the best thing that could happen right now is actually for Carney, who I see as the most dangerous man in Canada right now, to actually win leadership of the Liberal Party, because he'll have a few months in power. He'll be like a Kim Campbell, like in there for a few months and done. And he's never back in politics again. He can go on a speaking tour and whatever. That would be good. I mean, what I'd hate to see is Mark Carney actually get a 4 or 8 year term in there. So initially I was thinking, let's get Carney in there and just crush his political career. Because right now I think the Liberals are going to be crushed no matter who gets in there. But now I'm wondering, I'm a little bit nervous about that thought too. Because what if Carney turns the ship around? What if people are like, oh, this guy is a breath of fresh air. And oh, this is exactly what Canada needs. He's blah, 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 So that worries me a bit. But yeah, so I don't know. It's out of my control, so it's not worth worrying about.
I suppose, yeah. Mark Carney, definitely things to be scared of there. Okay. Give us your thoughts on Pierre Polyev?
Pierre Polyev. I think Polyev is I think in my mind, I think he's virtually the same as a Maxime Bernier. Except maybe he's more well spoken, but and of course he is playing a different game than Max. He's Maxime Bernier if he were playing real politics and not being kind of, I guess, a grifter, looking to, or maybe that's a harsh take on Max. I mean, Max and I have some personal history. I'm not a big fan of him, but let me do the charitable case for Max for a second. The difference between Max and Polyev is basically strategy. And Max's strategy, if I take him in good faith, is to spread a message of the people, the People's Party or whatever that is. And he's less concerned about getting votes and more concerned about shifting culture. And Polyev is, has the same beliefs as Max, but believes that getting into power is the best way to enact those beliefs. But in order to get into power, you have to play real politics, and you have to say things that are going to get you votes, and you have to promise things that are going to get you votes. And the trick in real politics is to promise things that you can hold your nose but live with. And I think that Polyev might be doing a lot of that to get politics, in the hopes that he can turn things around. And I think this is always the hope that conservatives have whenever they elect someone, that this person, we just need to get him into power. Yes, he's saying this and he's doing that, but once we get him in there, he can start doing some work. And of course, once you get that power, you find you really don't have that power because, and Polyev has even said as much in his interview with Jordan Peterson. He talked about how, like, you can vote me in, but that's just the beginning. Like my ability to get anything done is going to rely on people engaging in politics at the local level across this country, pushing back on school boards against, woke nonsense, getting involved in provincial politics and making sure, that this message or this philosophy that I'm promoting, is listened to at all levels of government so that I can get this through. Cause he said, I can't do it myself. And he's right. I mean, he's not being elected emperor or king. He's just another MP who has a title prime minister who's, has very limited executive power. And so, but at the end of the day, I'd rather have him than a liberal, but I'm under no delusions that he's going to make things appreciably better. I think, if he gets rid of the carbon tax, that'd be great. I think that'd be wonderful. But I'm not sure how much else he's going to be able to get done. And I think I'm worried a little bit about the statism that he's going to bring in on the other side, this reaction to wokeism, right? Bringing in laws that delve into private lives too much. Maybe rather than creating school freedom, what I see conservatives do is mandate what schools can and can't do, right? So I could see something like that come down, but that would worry me a little bit because that just then gives, again, liberals a cudgel to beat us over the head with when they get in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I tend to agree. I tend to agree with everything. I think, I'm pretty confident that the conservatives have a lock on this next one. To what degree, I don't know. But but even as far as I was reading this morning. I mean, even Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland, they're talking about scrapping the carbon tax at this point also. So makes me wonder how much more, like how, which things like that are good because it could push the conservatives, further in the type of direction we want if the liberals are combating them on some of those campaign promises, right?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting you said that because, I think that comes from Polyev's messaging, right? I mean, he's basically blamed government spending and the carbon tax on inflation, right? And that's partially true, but I think a bigger part of that inflationary story, and Polyev knows this, and he said it in long form interviews, is central bank printing money, right? That those mucking around with interest rates. And that's what's really robbing Canadians. And he said as much. And so, but I think that's harder to educate Canadians on than just saying government spending and this stupid tax or what's raising the cost of living. I think that's an easier message to sell and get out there and signal that, hey, I'm going to fix this. But now maybe it gives Polyev a lane to go into educating the Canadian public on central banking a little bit, and why Mark Carney is such a horrible choice, because he's a central banker personified, and this is the cause of inflation. And that may, raise the consciousness maybe of Canadians, I hope. But so that's something maybe to look forward to in the next little while, is a battle between Polyev and Carney on central banking, and bringing that into the political discourse.
That would be interesting. I do know one item on his platform that I found interesting was he wants to audit the Bank of Canada. Now this is something where the Parliament already has the authority to audit the Bank of Canada. It's a little different than the situation in the States, where the Federal Reserve is that far removed that.
Do you think it's a callback to Ron Paul's audit the Fed?
I don't know if
to Liberty types.
It could be, but the difference is that the federal government in the United States doesn't necessarily have the authority to audit the Federal Reserve, and that's what they would have been voting on. Here, it's just a matter of doing it. Yeah, it's a matter of doing it or not. Now, I think, given my opinion, in the United States, the Federal Reserve is likely up to things that are, not only against the interest of the American people, but against the interest of the American government as well. Like, they're involved with all kinds of other foreign governments and stuff, and that's a good reason to audit them. The Bank of Canada still, from an outsider looking in, it looks like they take a lot of direction from the Federal Reserve still at this point. And I don't know that, although they do a lot of things that are not in the interest of the Canadian people, I think they already toe the line with the Canadian government pretty closely. So it's an interesting item. I don't know what I don't know what would come of it, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think the if I'm taking it, again, putting a good spin on it, taking it in good faith, what it's signaling is, I'm interested in central bank. I'm going to do something about central banking. Now, what is an easier platform plank or something to sell to the Canadian people to communicate that you're going to look deeply into this issue of central banking? Is it, I'm going to use parliamentary procedure X, Y, and Z subsection, form this committee to subpoena this, or is it, I'm going to audit the BOC, right? I mean, obviously, it's what's a simple message to Canadians that can signal that I'm going to do something about central banking. You could say, I mean, a libertarian would obviously love him to say, we're going to abolish the central bank, but of course he'd never say that and hope to get elected, right? So he's got to say something in that realm that's lower on the continuum. And what is that thing? Well, it's probably audit the Fed is the right thing to say. Because I don't know what else you would say on a bumper sticker. What could you put on a bumper sticker that Polyev's going to do about central banking?
Yeah. No, for sure.
So
I understand the messaging. I think even a lot of Canadians in general understand that central banking is a problem, or it's at least something we need to pay more attention to at this point, especially in the post-COVID world, right? So again, and maybe it's just my cynicism. Maybe it's just my cynicism that either nothing's going to come of it, or it's just campaign rhetoric to attract attract guys like us to
Right.
his.
Well, listen, I'm never going to vote for him. I'm never
Yeah.
going to go out there and campaign for him. I'm just not, if there's a libertarian candidate in my area, I'd take the time to vote for them because I know it'll actually make a difference for the party and for getting the message out. Like every vote really matters and really counts when it comes to fringe parties. It doesn't matter when it comes to conservative. I mean, and it doesn't matter, at the end of the day, the way what I like to do is assume the worst. And I just assume everything is going to go to hell and that the conservatives aren't going to be able to do jack squat, even with their best intentions. And, even if I were the head of the Conservative Party and had to say all the things Paulie have said to get into office, I wouldn't be able to do much of anything. I just assume things are going to get worse and then just say, okay, given that fact, how can I live my life the best I can and not let that take me down and ruin my day and everything else, right? So I think that attitude is the only thing that's going to get us through the next little while as civilization crumbles around us and apocalypse comes upon us. Because hope springs eternal. Once all the rubble and everything clears, there's going to be a little spring. There's going to be a little plant come up, and life will begin anew, and the sun will come up and rebuild this world.
Okay.
Isn't that wonderful?
Enough of that. Enough of your optimism, Tim.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Donald Trump making Canada the 51st state. So what? I mean, I'll share my reaction a bit first. At first, I thought it was, just this was awesome. Not that it's going to happen, but that I love watching Trump troll Trudeau. Basically, that to me, this was like fantastic, and he had himself on top of a mountain with the Canadian flag. I thought it was hilarious, and then, but then it just kept going, and I'm like, man, it's hard to tell with him. Like, is he serious about this? So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know. I mean, obviously, the idea of living under a U.S. Constitution is certainly appealing to me, but creating less nations in the world and moving towards a one world government is not appealing to me. I think we're better off having separate nations. But I think all that's beside the point. I don't think we'll actually become a 51st state. But I think what Donald Trump is doing with his Greenland rhetoric and Canada rhetoric and Panama Canal rhetoric is he's painting a vision of this one kind of territory where it's under U.S. protection and there's free trade going on within it and kind of economic fluidity and he's kind of putting a picture in our mind. And like Scott Adams said, Trump is a master persuader. And so while Canada likely won't ever become a 51st state, we may end up part of a closer alliance or a freer trade or having some kind of joint agreement about protecting North American sovereignty and immigration onto the northern, all these things. So that's kind of how I take it. It's him painting a picture. And I don't even know if he does it consciously. I think he's kind of like an artist. Like he's tapped into some kind of source. And just like an artist doesn't completely understand what they're writing or their painting really means, because it's just kind of like coming from the muse and the source. And it's like something almost, I think that's almost what happens with Trump. Like he creates these things and these opportunities that he's not even aware he's creating, but it's coming from a place of instinct and creativity almost. And there's something there, but I don't think anyone really understands it. I don't think he even understands it. But when I hear him doing this talking, I'm thinking of this one kind of North American territory that is more tightly knit together and freedom of movement, freedom of commerce and all that. But who knows? I mean, on the other hand, he's got all these tariffs. I look at his tariffs as kind of I think he feels like the States is being oppressed, and that, when other countries impose tariffs on the States, that they're initiating aggression on him and are initiating aggression on Americans, and they are. And his job is to push back against that. And the way he does that is through strong tactics. And so I think that's what he's using tariffs to do. But then again, he's also talking about, running the U.S. government off tariffs instead of income tax. So where's he going to get those tariffs from? Obviously. But.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, there's a few things there. Yeah, first of all, it seems his messaging is completely paradoxical. Like when you're talking about these high tariffs and punishing Canada for all this, and in the same breath talking about welcoming them into the to the union, right, and protecting them, and us having like the free flow of goods and people. The 49th parallel is completely insignificant. Those are two pretty contrasting points to be making in the same sentence, right? So
they are
hard to tell.
Yeah, but if you the way I take it is, here's where we want to go: free trade, this wonderful partnership, blah blah blah. Here's where we're at now, and I got to impose some tariffs on you to make you smarten up, bring you in line, and that's kind of how I think.
Yeah, perhaps, right? I mean, I'd love to see Canada drop all their protectionist stuff and tariffs, and I think that would be fantastic. What was the second point I was going to make?
I mean, it's kind of silly, right? I mean, I could never. I'd have a hard time imposing tariffs. It always talks about like what Trump's doing is imposing a tariff, 25% tariff on Canada. Well, what he's really doing is imposing a 25% embargo on his own people, right? I mean, this is what you do to nations in a war: is you embargo them by preventing goods and services from other countries from entering their borders. And that's what Trump's doing to himself, to his own people.
Yeah.
And so, like, as a libertarian, I could never do that. My conscience wouldn't allow it. And I mean, he's hurting certain industries in Canada. He's not hurting Canada as a whole, but he's hurting everyone in the States that relies on those products, and passing the costs on to them. So, this is a battle of oligarchy, right? It's like my favorite corporations versus your favorite corporations, and the might of the government is there to support those corporations rather than the people.
Yeah,
it's kind of how I look at these things. But
yeah, and so that's exactly where I was going to. And as far as his tariffs are concerned, or replacing the income tax with tariffs, I mean, when the United States or Canada didn't have an income tax and we did run things off of tariffs, I mean, the structure was basically a flat import tax and a flat export tax, and it was low. Right. I don't know if it exceeded 10%. So really what has to happen is you have to, like, since Canada got the income tax in whatever it was, 1917 or something, what you have to do is
it's just temporary though, Darce. It's going away.
It was temporary. That's right. We're going back to
just got to pay for that war now, and then we're done.
Yeah,
I think we're close. Our payments ought got to be just about. I mean, it's been over 100 years. You'd think that's a pretty long amortization period,
but what you have to do is abolish every government agency that was created, since and even before income tax was created, or else you're gonna like those. You're just you're still punishing the consumer.
Right. Well, and that's
tariffs.
Where Doge comes in, right? That's Vivek and Elon's baby. And, so again, what we see here is this audacious vision, right? Of like, if everything Trump's saying comes to pass, and like if we can try to understand his vision, what I'm seeing is no more tariffs, and in North America, more unity, income tax being replaced by excise taxes, and government reduced down to like 5 or 10% of what it currently is now. And that's a lovely vision. I don't hate that, but it's much better than what we got now. Now, can he deliver on that? Of course not. I mean, that's a big order to do in 4 years. But maybe they'll get, 10 or 20% of the way there. And that's better than kicking the nuts.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And then this is the other thing that kind of bothers me about the conservative movement in Canada currently is they tend to be riding on a tailwind of like this robust and radical movement in the United States. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of the conservative supporters don't really realize that your conservative party in Canada is not anything like some of the radicals that they've put in power down in the States. And I don't know if we can expect,
right,
that type of, those type of policies from them.
Well, and Canadians don't want that. I mean, let's be frank. There's
Don't speak for us Canadians.
I'm speaking for you. You're all fucking idiots for not voting for me in 2015. Fuck you. You get what you deserve.
I might edit some of that out.
Yeah. Fair enough. Listen, you're right. I mean, I don't speak for all Canadians. Very loud and vociferous MAGA Canadian patriots. I certainly think that all Canadians are like them, right? They think that all Canadians are tired of this woke BS and that Trumpism in Canada would fly and get someone elected. I disagree strongly. I don't think that case at all. When I talk to normies at work, they're sick of wokeism, yeah, but they're also like not fans of Trump either. They are much more likely to vote for Polyev than for the left. And these are people that might go left or right, depending on the election. And certainly even people that go right that I know are uncomfortable with the type of rhetoric that Trump spews out. So Canadians are just built different. I mean, we aren't as based, let's say, as US, the US was born in when some based people shot and killed a bunch of authoritarians. They have a very different culture than Canada. That permeates their culture. Ours is not like that. Ours is polite and English, and we don't like all that bombacity and stuff, except for a loud minority that has basically taken over social media, right? The silent majority. If you get out in real life at all and talk to people, I mean, it's very different than what I see on social
media. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so back to the idea of the 51st state. I mean, obviously this goes also in the exact opposite direction of what most libertarians want to see. They don't want to see, right, like you said, a more global government. They want to see.
And I can't imagine anyone any Trump supporter or libertarian in the US would want to see Canada join the union. I mean, we'd basically be another California, right? As a voting bloc, we would essentially be California. We might even be further left than California. We certainly have, California has its very right-wing areas like rural and mountains, just like we do in Canada. But the vast majority, the Laurentian elite areas, for example, control the voting bloc in Canada. And they vote essentially the same as Californians in LA and San Francisco, right? So, this would turn the US further left. I mean, that could not be good for anyone in North America, right? So you want to immiserate the rest of the US by having Canada join it? Okay, you'll get a lot more resources and all that stuff, but you could get those resources if you just drop the tariffs and engage in free trade with us as well.
Yeah, for sure. And then this is what, too many people on the left just don't understand is that, break California off, break Canada into 10, different countries And those leftists can have their left-wing socialist utopia in those areas, and we'll have our, ideally Alberta
Yeah.
becomes some sort of libertarian paradise, but those, and you can still live peacefully, and the incentives for trade and everything are even stronger in smaller polities than they are in larger ones, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, yeah. And I mean, I think at the end of the day, while I appreciate people looking for a political solution to our problems here, I think at the end of the day, the kind of world you and I would like to see gets built rather um, than designed from the top down, let's say. And so parallel, more and more technology allows us the ability to engage in off the grid cooperation and networking and collaboration, right? And so I eventually see, Balaji Sivers, I can't remember. This guy wrote a book called Network States that has really piqued my interest. And in the book, he talks about how to use blockchain technology and different things to create. Goes through 7 stages of creating a decentralized, voluntary nation that gains more real estate, like from the private people that are citizens of this nation, getting more real estate, and eventually becoming recognized as internationally as essentially a state or a nation that has bargaining power, and at the very least protects. Maybe it's, you could imagine a nation of people, and by nation I mean a voluntary nation, one where people are contributing voluntarily to and network and using the wealth of that collective nation to protect people from future COVID regimes, funding their legal battles, creating autonomous zones and defending them, like doing all sorts of things that you can do. And all that is becoming more and more viable to people. And I actually see AI's potential here at liberating people as well, because I think as AI technology develops, the way it's being used, most people are using it as a way of increasing their own intelligence, right? So if you use it and you start using this stuff, it can become a real creative tool that increases your productivity and your intelligence. And I see that as a potential way that'll only accelerate the good ideas of liberty too, right? And over time, I think government, the state, just becomes less and less relevant in day-to-day lives. And that's my hope anyways. And so, my focus is less on the giant political geopolitics that I have absolutely no influence on, and more about what can I do to increase my own sovereignty and, like network with similar minded people and create, the kernels of a nation from
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So there's one thing about whether we're talking about a conversation of, enlarging a state, Canada becoming the 51st state of the United States, that sort of thing, or we're talking about secession. I think there's the one thing that kind of complicates the conversation is that few people understand or even take time to think about the distinction between nationalism and patriotism, right? Because there is a sense
Yeah.
of patriotism, as in, and
Well, yeah,
I'll
because
read it.
I've always been hesitant to call myself a patriot, because, and I'll tell you why. It's because I see, look, so what am I a patriot to? Am I a patriot to Canada? Well, what does that mean? What is Canada? Canada is a tax farm that was created by tax farmers and delineated by tax farmers, and it forced us into integration with all these other tax chattel called humans. So I'm essentially a plantation, to use a very crass analogy, don't shoot me, internet, is I'm a plantation slave along with other plantation slaves, and my patriotism is to my plantation. Like, I'm supposed to be in love with this plantation. Well, I guess it's better than a lot of the other plantations. That's something to be proud about, I guess. I just can't get there, right? And so, so that's to me is kind of nationalism. Now, I have
yeah. Let me
okay,
interrupt,
go
because there is
Yes,
a quote
interrupt.
here, and I've showed this to you before, and I really like it. It's by George Orwell. Now I found it actually in, make sure the light's not,
Oh,
this book by George
George
Woodcock, who is the famous Canadian essayist and anarchist.
Hmm.
And so I'll read this. Where he quotes his friend George Orwell. He knew George Orwell in the 30s. So nationalism is not to be confused with patriotism. Both words are normally used in so vague a way that any definition is liable to be challenged. But one must draw a distinction between them, since two different and even opposing ideas are involved. By patriotism, I mean devotion to a particular place and a particular way of life, which one believes to be the best in the world, but has no wish to force upon other people. Patriotism is by its nature defensive, both militarily and culturally. Nationalism, on the other hand, is inseparable from the desire for power. The abiding purpose of every nationalist is to secure more power and more prestige, not for himself, but for the nation or other unit in which he has chosen to sink his own individuality. That's from Notes on Nationalism by George Orwell, 1945. So
Yeah, and I guess that's fair. I think I'm not sure if that's still the definition or that's the definition by which people use the word, sense by which people use the word now. Because to me, it seems like patriots are all synonymous with nationalists. Like they're the same people. They're nationalists, and I'm sympathetic to the idea of nationalism as opposed to globalism, right? But then when I see the same nationalists who oppose globalism cheering on the idea of fewer countries in the world, of this globalist idea of the U.S. needs to expand its territory to include Canada and race that nation, I'm like wondering, well, what is, maybe they are patriots and not nationalists. Maybe they're globalist patriots, patriots who want globalism rather than so it's, I don't know. It's so confusing to me. I don't get it. My patriotism, let's say this, my patriotism leads me to embrace a new phrase, our new word I coined called anarcho-nationalism. And maybe I'll write an article or something about it, but I think that nations must be anarchic. They must be voluntary. They, yes, there's responsibilities when you're in a nation. You don't get to be a free rider. You have to contribute to your nation. But you must do so voluntarily or not be part of that. And
sure.
Not being part of the nation doesn't mean you get deported to an ice floe or something like that. It just means that you no longer enjoy the benefits of being in that nation.
Maybe it does. Maybe it does mean you get deported to an ice floe.
Maybe.
I'll tell my thoughts on the misconceptions between nationalism and patriotism is just intellectual laziness in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, people who are calling themselves a patriot and waving the Canadian flag, because my patriotism is to my family and the people I choose to surround myself with.
Yeah.
I love the geographical area that I live. I do feel an attachment to the land in a way, right? And yet I fully reject the idea that the government of Canada that I owe any allegiance to them at all, right?
Right. Well, and I'm very sympathetic to patriots out there. Like I'm with you. I get the sense that people who call themselves patriots want the same thing as you and I want. We want to be left alone. We want to be free of this woke nonsense of all this, cultural degradation. It's just that we have different ways of going about it, and we see the kind of the folly of patriots who want to use the state to like nationalize bathrooms or something like that, so that a trans person can't come in their washroom, right? Like, I don't believe nationalizing bathrooms is the right way to go. I think privatizing all the bathrooms is the way to go. Maybe some bathrooms, private bathrooms, are unisex or a unit, like allow all genders in. Others are very segregated. Maybe there's 51 place has 52 different washrooms for all the different genders. Maybe another place, who knows? I don't know what the right answer is to bathroom, but I more, in my house, my wife and I use the same bathroom, not at the same time. Maybe like, I don't know what the correct bathroom solution is, but I know that giving it to the federal government to dictate is probably not the answer. And it's probably going to result in bad consequences when the people you don't like become in charge of them.
Absolutely. Tim, thanks a lot for coming on.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Anytime, Darcy.
That was Tim Moen, former leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada. You can check him out on X at Moen_Tim. Also check out his podcast, The Tim Moen Show. You'll find a few episodes with yours truly on there. Thanks for listening. See you later.